Hey everyone, today we're diving into an exciting journey through the history of America. From the indigenous peoples who first called this land home, to the events that shaped the nation we know today, we'll explore it all. Whether you're a history buff or just curious to learn something new, this series is for you. So, grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time together. Let's get started. The history of America, the indigenous peoples, pre-Columbian America. Before Europeans set foot on American soil, the land was already alive with the vibrant cultures and civilizations of indigenous peoples. These Native Americans were the original inhabitants, living in harmony with nature and building rich, diverse societies. In North America, tribes like the Cherokee, Navajo, and Iroquois thrived. They lived in villages, hunted, fished, and farmed crops like corn, beans, and squash. They had their own languages, traditions, and spiritual beliefs, often holding ceremonies to honor the earth and their ancestors. Some tribes, like the Iroquois, even formed powerful alliances and created early systems of governance. In Central America, the Maya built impressive cities with towering pyramids and temples. They were masters of math and astronomy, creating accurate calendars and studying the stars. The Aztecs, another mighty civilization, ruled a vast empire from their capital, Tenochtitlan, a bustling city with canals, markets, and grand architecture. In South America, the Inca Empire stretched across the Andes Mountains. They were skilled engineers, building extensive road networks and bridges to connect their territories. They also farmed on terraced hillsides and crafted stunning works of art from gold and silver. These indigenous peoples lived sustainably, respecting the land and its resources. Their cultures were deeply rooted in community, spirituality, and a profound connection to nature. Their legacy is a crucial part of America's history, long before European explorers ever arrived. European exploration and encounters 1490 to 1607. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer working for Spain, set out to find a new route to Asia. Instead, he landed in the Bahamas, marking the first major European contact with the Americas. This event opened the door for more European explorers to come. After Columbus, Spanish conquerors arrived in search of gold, land, and power. Leaders like Hernan Cortes and Francisco Pizarro led expeditions that changed history. Cortes conquered the Aztec Empire in Mexico, and Pizarro defeated the Inca Empire in Peru. These conquests brought great wealth to Spain but caused immense suffering for Native Americans. The arrival of Europeans had a huge impact on indigenous peoples. Diseases like smallpox, brought by the Europeans, spread quickly among native communities, killing millions who had no immunity. Europeans also took indigenous lands and forced many into hard labor, disrupting their way of life. Despite the hardships, there were some exchanges. Europeans brought new tools, animals, and crops to the Americas, while Native Americans shared their knowledge of farming and survival skills. By 1607, when the English established their first permanent settlement at Jamestown, Virginia, the foundation for European colonization was set. This period of exploration and encounters shaped the future of both indigenous peoples and European settlers, leaving a lasting impact on the history of the Americas. Colonial Foundation 1607 to 1763. Between 1607 and 1763, Europeans settled in North America and created the 13 colonies, which later became the United States. This time was filled with new beginnings, hard work, and challenges. The start of the 13 colonies. In 1607, the English built their first permanent settlement at Jamestown, Virginia. Over the next 100 years, more colonies were established along the coast. New England colonies, settled by Puritans, a religious group who wanted to practice their faith freely. They started colonies like Plymouth 1620 and Massachusetts Bay 1630. Middle colonies, places like New York and Pennsylvania, were known for their diversity, where people of different religions and backgrounds lived together. Southern colonies. These colonies, like Virginia and the Carolinas, focused on farming crops like tobacco and rice. They used enslaved Africans to work on large farms called plantations. Life in the colonies. The Puritans in New England lived in tight-knit communities centered around their church. They valued education and started schools like Harvard College in 1636. In the middle colonies, farmers grew wheat and other grains, earning the region the nickname breadbasket. In the South, the economy depended on crops grown by enslaved people. Challenges and conflicts. Life was tough for the colonists. They faced harsh weather, diseases, and conflicts with Native Americans over land. Wars like King Philip's War 1675 to 1678 in New England showed the struggles between settlers and indigenous peoples. By 1763, the 13 colonies had grown into thriving communities with their own cultures and economies. This period set the stage for the American Revolution and the creation of a new nation. The road to revolution 1763–1776. The years between 1763 and 1776 were a time of growing tension between the American colonies and Great Britain. This period, known as the Road to Revolution, was marked by unfair taxes, protests, and a fight for freedom that eventually led to the American Revolution. Taxation without representation. After the French and Indian War 1765–1763, Britain was in debt and decided to make the American colonies pay for it. They passed new taxes, like the Stamp Act 1765 and the Townshend Act 1767, which taxed everyday items like paper, tea, and glass. The colonists were angry because they had no say in these decisions. No taxation without representation became their rallying cry. Protests and resistance ***. Colonists began to protest these unfair taxes. Groups like the Sons of Liberty organized boycotts of British goods and held public demonstrations. In 1770, tensions boiled over in the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers shot and killed 5 colonists during a confrontation. The Boston Tea Party. In 1773, Britain passed the Tea Act, which gave a British company control over tea sales in the colonies. This angered colonists even more. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This event, known as the Boston Tea Party, was a bold act of defiance against British rule. The Continental Congresses. In response to Britain's harsh punishments for the Boston Tea Party called the Intolerable Acts, the colonies united. In 1774, they held the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Leaders from 12 colonies met to discuss their grievances and plan a response. They agreed to boycott British goods and prepare for possible conflict. By 1775, fighting broke out between colonists and British soldiers at Lexington and Concord, marking the start of the American Revolution. In 1776, the Second Continental Congress met and, on July 4, adopted the Declaration of Independence, officially declaring the colonies free from British rule. The road to revolution was a time of courage, unity, and determination. It set the stage for the birth of a new nation, the United States of America. The American Revolution 1775 to 1783. The American Revolution was a war fought between the American colonies and Great Britain. The colonists wanted freedom from British rule, and this fight for independence changed the course of history. The war begins. The war started in April 1775, when British soldiers and colonial militias clashed at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. This was the first battle of the Revolution. Soon after, the Second Continental Congress met and chose George Washington to lead the Colonial Army, called the Continental Army. Key battles. Battle of Bunker Hill 1775, one of the early battles, where the colonists showed they could stand up to the powerful British Army. Battle of Saratoga 1777, a major turning point in the war. The colonists won this battle, convincing France to join the fight as their ally. Battle of Yorktown 1781, the last major battle of the war. With help from French troops and navy, the colonists trapped the British Army, forcing them to surrender. The Declaration of Independence. On July 4, 1776, the colonies made a bold move. The Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson. This document declared that the colonies were free from British rule and explained why they deserved independence. It was a powerful statement of freedom and equality. The end of the war. After years of fighting, the war officially ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. Britain recognized the United States as an independent country. The colonists had won their freedom. The American Revolution was a time of bravery, sacrifice, and hope. It gave birth to a new nation, the United States of America, and inspired people around the world to fight for their own freedom. Forging a new nation 1783-1800. After winning independence from Britain in 1783, the United States faced a big challenge: how to build a strong and fair government. At first, the country was governed by the Articles of Confederation, a set of rules that gave most power to the states. But this system didn't work well. The national government was too weak. It couldn't tax, enforce laws, or solve problems between states. People realized they needed a better plan. The Constitution, a new plan for government. In 1787, leaders from all 13 states met in Philadelphia to fix the problems. Instead of fixing the old system, they created a brand new plan called the U.S. Constitution. This document set up a stronger federal national government with 3 branches. 1. Executive, the president, to enforce laws. 2. Legislative, Congress, to make laws. And 3. Judicial, the courts, to interpret laws. The Constitution also included a system of checks and balances to make sure no branch of government became too powerful. But not everyone agreed with this new plan. Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. The country split into 2 groups. Federalists like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison supported the Constitution. They believed a strong national government would keep the country united and stable. Anti-Federalists like Patrick Henry were worried the new government would take away people's freedoms and rights. They demanded a list of protections for individual liberties. To solve this, the Federalists promised to add a Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, to protect freedoms like speech, religion, and the right to a fair trial. This compromise helped get the Constitution approved in 1789. The Washington administration, a new government in action. George Washington, the hero of the Revolutionary War, became the first president in 1789. His leadership was crucial in setting up the new government. He appointed smart and talented people to help him, like Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury to handle money and debt. Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State to handle foreign affairs. But even Washington's team had disagreements. Hamilton wanted a strong central government and a national bank to help the economy. Jefferson, on the other hand, believed in giving more power to the states and protecting farmers and ordinary people. These disagreements eventually led to the creation of the first political parties, the Federalists' Hamilton's side and the Democratic Republicans' Jefferson's side. Washington also set important traditions, like stepping down after 2 terms as president, showing that no leader should have too much power. Challenges and successes. The new nation faced many challenges, like paying off war debts, dealing with Native American conflicts, and staying neutral in European wars. But by 1800, the U.S. had a working government, a growing economy, and a sense of unity. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights laid the foundation for a country built on freedom, fairness, and the rule of law. In just a few short years, the United States went from a loose group of states to a strong, independent nation ready to face the future. Expansion and conflict 1800 to 1850. Between 1800 and 1850, the United States grew bigger and stronger, but this growth came with challenges and conflicts. The country expanded westward, driven by the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that it was America's destiny to stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. However, this expansion often came at the expense of Native Americans and other nations. The Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the U.S. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a huge deal with France called the Louisiana Purchase. For just $15 million, the U.S. bought a massive piece of land west of the Mississippi River, doubling the size of the country. This land included parts of 15 future states, like Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri. The purchase opened up new opportunities for farming, trade, and exploration. Jefferson sent explorers Lewis and Clark to map the new territory and find a route to the Pacific Ocean. Their journey helped Americans learn more about the land and its resources. Manifest destiny, spreading west. The idea of manifest destiny became popular in the 1840s. Americans believed it was their right and duty to expand across the continent. This led to more settlers moving west, building farms, and starting new towns. However, this expansion often ignored the rights of Native Americans and other people already living there. The Indian Removal Act, a sad chapter. As settlers moved west, they wanted Native American lands. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, which forced Native American tribes to leave their homelands and move west of the Mississippi River. This journey, known as the Trail of Tears, was devastating. Thousands of Native Americans died from hunger, disease, and harsh conditions as they were forced to relocate. The Mexican-American War expanding to the Pacific. In the 1840s, the U.S. set its sights on lands controlled by Mexico, like Texas, California, and New Mexico. Texas had already won independence from Mexico in 1836 and joined the U.S. in 1845. This angered Mexico, and tensions led to the Mexican-American War 1846 to 1848. The U.S. won the war and gained a huge amount of land through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This included present-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, and more. However, the war was controversial, and many Americans questioned whether it was right to take land from another country. The impact of expansion. By 1850, the U.S. had grown from 16 states to 31, stretching from coast to coast. This expansion brought new opportunities, like gold in California and fertile land for farming, but it also caused problems. Native Americans lost their lands and way of life. Tensions grew between the North and South over whether new states would allow slavery. Conflicts with Mexico and other nations raised questions about fairness and justice. The period of expansion and conflict shaped the United States into a larger, more powerful nation, but it also left a legacy of struggle and inequality that would continue to challenge the country in the years to come. The antebellum era and sectional crisis. The antebellum era, meaning before the war, was the time between 1815 and 1861 when the United States grew and changed, but also became deeply divided. The biggest issue was slavery, which caused growing tensions between the North and the South. These tensions eventually led to the Civil War. Slavery in the South. In the South, the economy depended on farming, especially crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar. Enslaved African Americans were forced to work on large plantations, and slavery became a key part of Southern life. By the mid-1800s, there were about 4 million enslaved people in the U.S. Southerners argued that slavery was necessary for their economy and way of life. Abolitionism, fighting to end slavery. In the North, many people began to see slavery as wrong and cruel. Abolitionists were people who worked to end slavery. Famous abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved person, Harriet Tubman, who helped enslaved people escape through the Underground Railroad, and William Lloyd Garrison, a writer and activist, spoke out against slavery and demanded change. The North had a different economy, based on factories, trade, and small farms. Most northern states had already abolished slavery, and many Northerners believed it should and everywhere. Growing tensions between North and South. As the U.S. expanded westward, the North and South clashed over whether new states and territories would allow slavery. Each side wanted to control Congress and the future of the country. Here are some key events that increased tensions. 1. The Missouri Compromise 1820. To keep the balance between free and slave states, Missouri was admitted as a slave state, and Maine as a free state. It also drew a line across the country. Slavery would be allowed south of the line but banned north of it. 2. The Compromise of 1850. After the Mexican-American War, new territories like California wanted to join the U.S. The Compromise of 1850 allowed California to join as a free state but also included a stricter fugitive slave law, which required Northerners to help capture and return escaped enslaved people. This angered many Northerners. 3. Uncle Tom's Cabin 1852. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this novel about the horrors of slavery. It became very popular and opened the eyes of many Northerners to the cruelty of slavery. 4. The Kansas-Nebraska Act 1854. This law allowed people in Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, a concept called popular sovereignty. This led to violent clashes between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers, known as Bleeding Kansas. 5. The Dred Scott Decision 1857. The Supreme Court ruled that enslaved people were not citizens and had no rights. It also said Congress couldn't ban slavery in the territories. This decision outraged abolitionists and deepened the divide. The road to crisis. By the 1850s, the North and South were deeply divided. The South feared that the North would try to end slavery, while the North saw the South as trying to spread slavery across the country. These tensions grew so strong that compromise became impossible. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the spread of slavery, was elected president. Southern states, feeling threatened, began to secede, leave the Union. This marked the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. The antebellum era was a time of great change and conflict. It showed how deeply divided the nation had become over slavery, setting the stage for one of the most difficult chapters in American history. The Civil War 1861 to 1865. The Civil War was a bloody fight between the northern states, the Union, and the southern states, the Confederacy, over slavery, states' rights, and the future of the United States. Secession. The South leaves the Union. After Abraham Lincoln, who opposed slavery spread, became president in 1860, Southern states felt threatened. They believed states should decide whether to allow slavery. Starting with South Carolina, 11 Southern states seceded, left the Union, and formed the Confederate States of America in 1861. The Confederacy wanted to protect slavery and their way of life. Major battles. A brutal war begins. Fort Sumter, 1861. The war began when Confederate forces attacked a Union fort in South Carolina. Battle of Antietam, 1862. The bloodiest single day in U.S. history. Over 23,000 soldiers died. The Union won, but the fight ended in a draw. Battle of Gettysburg, 1863. A turning point. The Union defeated the Confederacy in Pennsylvania, ending the South's invasion of the North. Vicksburg, 1863. The Union captured this Mississippi city, splitting the Confederacy in two. The North had more people, factories, and railroads. The South had skilled generals like Robert E. Lee but struggled with shortages of food and supplies. Emancipation Proclamation, freedom for the enslaved. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation declaring enslaved people in Confederate states forever free. It didn't end slavery everywhere, but it changed the war's purpose. Now the Union was fighting to end slavery, not just save the country. Many freed African Americans joined the Union Army, helping turn the tide. The Confederacy's fall, the war ends. By 1864–1865, the South was running out of soldiers and supplies. Key events led to its defeat. Sherman's march to the sea. Union General William Sherman destroyed Southern railroads, farms, and cities, crippling the Confederacy's economy. Appomattox Courthouse, April 1865. Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant in Virginia. The war was over. Aftermath. A nation changed. The Civil War was the deadliest war in U.S. history. Over 600,000 soldiers died. The Union was preserved, and slavery was officially abolished in 1865 by the 13th Amendment. But the war left deep scars. The South was ruined, and the struggle for equality for African Americans had just begun. The Civil War reshaped America, ending slavery but setting the stage for a long, difficult journey toward justice and unity. Reconstruction and its aftermath, 1865–1896. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. faced a huge challenge, rebuilding the South and deciding what freedom meant for 4 million formerly enslaved people. This period, called Reconstruction, brought hope and progress but also backlash and betrayal. Rebuilding the South. The South was destroyed after the war. Farms, cities, and railroads lay in ruins. To help formerly enslaved people, Congress created the Freedmen's Bureau. It provided food, schools, and medical care, and helped Black Americans find jobs or buy land. But many white Southerners resisted change. They passed black codes, laws that limited black people's freedom, forcing them to work for low wages or return to plantations. Some formed groups like the Ku Klux Klan to terrorize Black Americans and stop them from voting. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, a new promise. To protect freedom and equality, 3 amendments were added to the Constitution. 1. 13th Amendment 1865 abolished slavery everywhere in the U.S. 2. 14th Amendment 1868 made Black Americans citizens and promised equal protection under the law. 3. 15th Amendment 1870 gave black men the right to vote. For a time, black Americans held political power. Hundreds were elected to local offices, state legislatures, and even Congress. The rise of Jim Crow, a step backward. By the 1870s, Northern support for Reconstruction faded. In 1877, U.S. troops left the South as part of a political deal, and white Southerners quickly took back control. They created Jim Crow laws, rules that enforced racial segregation, keeping black and white people separate. Black Americans were banned from white schools, restaurants, and trains. Sharecropping trapped many black families in poverty, working on farms for little pay. Southern states used tricks like poll taxes and literacy tests to stop black men from voting. Violence and lynching were used to scare black communities. By 1896, the Supreme Court's Plessy v. Ferguson ruling said separate but equal was legal, making segregation even worse. The aftermath, a broken promise. By 1896, Reconstruction's dreams of equality were crushed. Black Americans faced racism, poverty, and violence. The Jim Crow system would last for decades, until the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Reconstruction showed both the power of change and the stubbornness of hate. It laid the foundation for equality in laws but not in real life. The fight for justice was far from over. The Gilded Age and Industrial America 1870-1900. In the late 1800s, America transformed from a nation of farms into a land of factories, cities, and big business. This era was called the Gilded Age, a time when the country looked shiny and successful on the outside, but hid problems like poverty and corruption underneath. Here's how it happened. Railroads, the steel highways. Trains changed everything. Companies built railroads across America, linking the East Coast to the West. This let people travel faster and ship goods like coal, steel, and food cheaply. But building railroads was brutal. Workers, many Chinese immigrants and Civil War veterans, faced dangerous conditions. Railroad bosses like Cornelius Vanderbilt got super rich, and some companies became monopolies. They had no competition, so they could charge whatever they wanted. Monopolies, the robber barons. A few powerful men controlled entire industries. John D. Rockefeller owned almost all oil refineries, Standard Oil. Andrew Carnegie ruled steel. These tycoons got rich by crushing small businesses, paying workers low wages, and bribing politicians. They argued they were helping America grow, but many saw them as greedy robber barons. Labor unions, workers fight back. Factory jobs were tough. Workers, including women and kids, labored 12 hours a day in unsafe conditions for little pay. When they demanded better treatment, bosses often fired them. So workers formed labor unions, groups that fought for rights. Strikes, like the Pullman Strike 1894 or the Haymarket Riot 1886, turned violent. Unions didn't always win, but they slowly pushed for changes like shorter workdays. Urbanization, cities boom and struggle. As factories grew, people flooded into cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh for jobs. This urbanization led to overcrowded slums, filthy streets, and disease. Rich folks built mansions, while poor families crammed into tiny apartments called tenements. Immigrants from Europe and Asia arrived in waves, facing discrimination but also bringing new cultures and ideas. The legacy: the Gilded Age made America an industrial giant, but at a cost. Monopolies controlled the economy, workers suffered, and cities struggled. By 1900, people demanded reforms, leading to new laws to break up monopolies and protect workers. It was a messy, unequal time, but it shaped the modern U.S. we know today. In short, trains, factories, and big business boomed. A few got filthy rich, many stayed poor, and workers began to fight for fairness. That's the Gilded Age. The story of the Progressive Era and America's big ambitions 1890 to 1920. In the early 1900s, America was like a messy house. Factories were unsafe, cities were dirty, and politicians took bribes. But a wave of reformers called progressives tried to clean things up. At the same time, the U.S. started acting like a global superhero or bully, depending on who you ask. Here's the scoop. The Progressive Era, fixing America's mess. Progressives wanted to make life fairer and safer. They fought for child labor laws. Kids as young as 6 worked in factories. Progressives said, let them go to school instead. Cleaner food. Ever heard of the jungle? This gross book showed rats in meat-packing plants. Yuck. Laws like the *** Pure Food and Drug Act 1906 made food safer. Women's suffrage. Women couldn't vote. Heroes like Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul protested, went to jail, and finally won the 19th Amendment in 1920. Trust busting. Presidents like Teddy Roosevelt broke up giant monopolies like Standard Oil to stop them from cheating people. Overseas ambitions. America plays world police. While fixing things at home, the U.S. also looked outward. Spanish-American War 1898. America said, let's help Cuba fight Spain. But after winning, the U.S. took Spain's colonies, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Oops, not so heroic. Philippines fight back. Filipinos thought they'd get freedom. Instead, the U.S. took over, leading to a bloody war. Many Americans asked, are we becoming bullies like the empires we hated? Hawaii and Panama. The U.S. grabbed Hawaii for its sugar and helped Panama rebel against Colombia, just to build the Panama Canal, a shortcut for ships. Why did America expand? Money. Factories needed new markets to sell stuff. Pride. Some thought the U.S. should spread its superior culture, a racist idea called the white man's burden. Power. Leaders wanted the U.S. to be as strong as Europe. The mixed legacy. The Progressive Era brought huge changes: safer food, votes for women, and fairer rules. But overseas, America's actions were complicated, freeing some people while controlling others. By 1920, the U.S. was richer and more powerful, but still figuring out how to be a good guy at home and abroad. In short, cleaner meat, voting rights, and breaking monopolies. But also taking over islands and ignoring people's freedom. That's the Progressive Era. World War I and the Roaring Twenties 1914 to 1929. In 1914, a big war began in Europe called World War I. Many countries fought, but the United States stayed neutral at first. By 1917, Germany kept attacking ships, including American ones, and sent a secret message, the Zimmerman telegram, asking Mexico to join them against the U.S. This made America angry. So they entered the war in 1917, helping Britain and France win by 1918. After the war, leaders met in France to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The treaty punished Germany harshly, making them pay money and accept blame for the war. This made many Germans upset. The treaty also created the League of Nations to keep peace, but the U.S. refused to join, preferring to stay out of foreign problems. Back home, the 1920s became a time of fun and change, known as the Roaring Twenties. Soldiers returned, factories switched from making weapons to cars and radios, and businesses boomed. People had more money to spend on new inventions like cars thanks to Henry Ford's Model T, refrigerators, and movies. Culturally, life felt freer. Women won the right to vote in 1920 and embraced bold styles, shorter dresses, short hair, and were called flappers. Jazz music exploded, with legends like Louis Armstrong lighting up dance clubs. African American culture thrived in the Harlem Renaissance, celebrating art, music, and writing. But not everything was bright. In 1920, the government banned alcohol prohibition, hoping to reduce crime. Instead, secret bars called speakeasies popped up, and gangsters like Al Capone made money selling illegal drinks. The economy soared as people bought goods on credit and invested in the stock market. By 1929, though, the fun ended when the stock market crashed, wiping out savings and starting the Great Depression. From the ashes of war, the 1920s roared with life, a mix of progress, rebellion, and excess before the decade closed with a dramatic fall. The Great Depression and the New Deal 1929 to 1941. The Great Depression was one of the toughest times in American history. It started in 1929 when the stock market crashed. Imagine people losing their life savings overnight, businesses closing, and millions of workers losing their jobs. It was a time of great hardship, with many families struggling to afford food, clothing, and shelter. The stock market crash happened because people had been buying stocks, shares of companies with borrowed money, hoping to get rich quickly. But when prices started to fall, everyone panicked and tried to sell their stocks at once. This caused the market to collapse, leading to a chain reaction of economic problems. Banks failed, factories shut down, and unemployment soared. By 1933, about 25% of Americans were jobless. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt (FDR) took office and promised to help the country recover. He introduced a series of programs called the New Deal. These programs aimed to fix the economy, create jobs, and provide relief to those suffering. Here are some key parts of the New Deal. 1. Jobs programs. FDR created jobs for millions of people. For example, the Civilian Conservation Corps (CCC) hired young men to plant trees and build parks. The Works Progress Administration (WPA) built roads, schools, and hospitals. 2. Bank reform. FDR worked to stabilize the banks. He declared a bank holiday, closing banks temporarily to stop people from withdrawing all their money. Then, he passed laws to make banks safer and restore public trust. 3. Social Security. One of the most lasting parts of the New Deal was Social Security. It provided financial help to retired workers and those who were unemployed or disabled. 4. Farm and industry support. The government helped farmers by paying them to grow less food, which raised prices and helped them earn more. It also set rules for businesses to ensure fair wages and working conditions. The New Deal didn't solve all the problems overnight, but it gave people hope and helped the economy recover slowly. It also changed the role of the government. Before the Great Depression, the government didn't get involved much in people's lives. But after the New Deal, it became more active in helping citizens and managing the economy. The Great Depression ended when World War II began in 1941. The war created jobs and boosted the economy. But the New Deal left a lasting legacy, showing that the government could play a big role in helping people during tough times. It also transformed American society, making it stronger and more resilient for the future. World War II Home Front and Global Front 1941-1945. World War II was a global conflict that involved almost every part of the world. It began in 1939, but the United States joined in 1941 after a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii, by Japan. This attack destroyed ships and planes and killed thousands of Americans. The next day, the U.S. declared war on Japan, and soon after, on Germany and Italy, who were Japan's allies. The home front. While soldiers fought overseas, life in the U.S. changed dramatically. This period is called the home front. Here's what happened. 1. Everyone pitched in, men went off to fight. So women stepped up to work in factories, building planes, tanks, and weapons. They became known as Rosie the Riveter, a symbol of women's strength and contribution to the war effort. 2. Rationing. Supplies like rubber, metal, and food were needed for the war, so people at home had to use less. Families received ration books that limited how much meat, sugar, or gasoline they could buy. 3. War bonds. To help pay for the war, Americans bought war bonds, which were like loans to the government. People also collected scrap metal and rubber to recycle for the war. 4. Challenges at home. Not everyone was treated equally. Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps because of fear and prejudice, even though most were loyal citizens. African Americans and other minorities faced discrimination but still contributed to the war effort. The global front. The war was fought on many fronts, but here are some key events. 1. D-Day, June 6, 1944. This was the largest sea invasion in history. Allied forces including the U.S., Britain, and Canada landed on the beaches of Normandy, France, to fight Nazi Germany. It was a turning point in the war, leading to the liberation of Europe from Nazi control. 2. The Holocaust. During the war, Nazi Germany carried out the Holocaust, a genocide that killed 6 million Jews and millions of others, including Roma, disabled people, and political opponents. The Allies discovered concentration camps as they advanced, revealing the horrors of the Nazi regime. 3. The atomic age. In 1945, the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, 1 on Hiroshima and 1 on Nagasaki. These bombs caused massive destruction and forced Japan to surrender, ending the war. This marked the beginning of the atomic age, a time when the world realized the devastating power of nuclear weapons. The end of the war. World War II ended in 1945. The Allies, including the U.S., Britain, and the Soviet Union, defeated the Axis powers Germany, Italy, and Japan. The war changed the world in many ways. It led to the creation of the United Nations to promote peace. The U.S. and the Soviet Union became superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. The Holocaust reminded the world of the dangers of hatred and prejudice. The war was a time of great sacrifice and courage, both on the battlefield and at home. It showed how people could come together to fight for freedom and justice, but it also left a legacy of lessons about the cost of war and the importance of peace. Post-war prosperity and the Cold War begins 1945 to 1960. After World War II ended in 1945, the United States entered a time of great change. The economy boomed, and many Americans enjoyed better lives. But at the same time, the world became divided by a new kind of conflict called the Cold War. This wasn't a war with fighting on battlefields, but a tense rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union (USSR), who had different ideas about how the world should work. Here's what happened during this time. The Truman Doctrine 1947. After the war, many countries in Europe were struggling to rebuild. The U.S. was worried that the Soviet Union might try to spread its communist ideas to these weak nations. To stop this, President Harry Truman came up with the Truman Doctrine. It was a promise to help countries fighting against communism. The U.S. gave money and support to countries like Greece and Turkey to keep them from falling under Soviet influence. This marked the start of the U.S. policy of containment, trying to stop communism from spreading. McCarthyism 1950s. During the Cold War, many Americans were afraid of communism spreading to the U.S. This fear led to a period called McCarthyism, named after Senator Joseph McCarthy. He claimed that communists were hiding in the U.S. government, schools, and even Hollywood. People were accused of being communists without much proof, and many lost their jobs or reputations. This time became known for its paranoia and unfair accusations. The Korean War 1950–1953. The Cold War turned hot in Korea. After World War II, Korea was split into two parts: North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, and South Korea, supported by the U.S. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, trying to unite the country under communism. The U.S. and its allies joined the war to help South Korea. After 3 years of fighting, the war ended in a stalemate, and Korea remained divided. This showed how the Cold War could lead to real battles, even if the U.S. and USSR never fought directly. Suburbanization. While the Cold War brought tension, life at home in the U.S. was changing for the better. The economy was strong, and many families had more money to spend. Soldiers returning from World War II got help from the government to buy homes and go to college. This led to the growth of suburbs neighborhoods outside of cities where families could live in houses with yards. Cars became more common, and new highways made it easy to travel. The American dream of owning a home and having a happy family became a reality for many. Conclusion. The years after World War II were a mix of good and bad. The U.S. became a superpower, and many Americans enjoyed prosperity and new opportunities. But the Cold War brought fear and conflict, both at home and abroad. From the Truman Doctrine to McCarthyism, the Korean War, and the rise of suburbs, this was a time of big changes that shaped the modern world. Civil rights and social change. 1950s–1970s. The 1950s to the 1970s were a time of big changes in the United States. People fought for equality and justice, challenging unfair laws and traditions. Here are some of the key events and movements that helped shape this era. Brown v. Board of Education 1954. In the 1950s, schools in many parts of the U.S. were segregated, meaning black and white students had to go to separate schools. But the schools for black students were often in poor condition and didn't have the same resources as white schools. In 1954, the Supreme Court made a landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education. They ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional because it was not equal. This was a huge step forward in the fight for civil rights, but it took many years for schools to actually desegregate. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. One of the most important leaders of the civil rights movement was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He believed in using peaceful protests to fight for equality. In 1963, he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington, where he talked about his vision of a world where people are judged by their character, not their skin color. Dr. King and others organized marches, sit-ins, and boycotts to demand an end to segregation and discrimination. Their efforts led to important laws being passed, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made segregation illegal in public places. The Voting Rights Act 1965. Even after slavery ended, many black Americans were still prevented from voting. Some states made them pass unfair tests or pay special taxes to vote. In 1965, peaceful protesters marched from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, to demand voting rights. They were met with violence, but their bravery brought attention to the issue. Later that year, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, which made it illegal to use unfair practices to stop people from voting. This was a major victory for the civil rights movement. Feminist movements. During this time, women also fought for equality. Many women felt they were treated unfairly at work, at home, and in society. They wanted equal pay, better job opportunities, and the right to make decisions about their own lives. The feminist movement grew in the 1960s and 1970s, led by women like Betty Friedan, who wrote the book The Feminine Mystique. Women organized protests and pushed for changes, like the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Title IX law in 1972, which helped women get equal opportunities in education and sports. The movement also fought for reproductive rights and other important issues. Conclusion: the 1950s to the 1970s were a time of great progress, but also struggle. People like Martin Luther King Jr. and many others worked hard to make the U.S. a fairer and more equal place. From ending school segregation to securing voting rights and fighting for women's equality, these changes helped shape the country we know today. While there is still work to be done, this era showed the power of people coming together to demand justice and equality for all. The Vietnam War and the era of turmoil 1960 to 1975. In the 1960s and early 1970s, America was deeply divided over the Vietnam War. The U.S. had sent troops to help South Vietnam fight against Communist North Vietnam, but the war dragged on for years with no clear victory. Many young Americans were drafted, forced to join the military, and thousands died in battle. As the war continued, a counterculture movement grew. Young people rejected traditional values, experimented with new music like rock and roll, fashion, and lifestyles. They protested against the war, chanting, "Make love, not war," and burning draft cards. Big protests, like the one at Kent State University in 1970, turned violent when National Guard soldiers shot and killed for students. At the same time, President Richard Nixon promised to end the war but secretly expanded bombing campaigns. Then, in 1972, a scandal called Watergate broke out. Nixon's team was caught spying on political opponents by breaking into the Watergate Hotel. When the truth came out, Nixon lied and tried to cover it up. Finally, in 1974, facing impeachment, being kicked out of office, Nixon resigned, the first U.S. president ever to do so. The war officially ended in 1975 when North Vietnam took over South Vietnam, and America left in defeat. This era was a time of anger, protest, and change, shaping modern America forever. The end of the Cold War and America's global leadership 1980 to 1991. In the 1980s, the Cold War, a long standoff between the U.S. and the Soviet Union (USSR), was reaching its end. President Ronald Reagan took a tough stance against communism, calling the USSR an evil empire. His economic plan, Reaganomics, cut taxes and boosted military spending, trying to strengthen America while squeezing the Soviet economy. A major turning point came in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. This wall had divided communist East Berlin from democratic West Berlin for decades. When people protested and tore it down, it became a powerful symbol of freedom and the weakening of Soviet control. By 1991, the Soviet Union was collapsing. Its economy was failing, and its republics like Russia and Ukraine began breaking away. The USSR officially dissolved, ending the Cold War. The U.S. emerged as the world's only superpower, leading global politics and promoting democracy. This period marked a new era of American influence, with the U.S. shaping world events more than ever before. Modern America, challenges and transformations 1991 present. After the Cold War ended in 1991, America entered a new era filled with both progress and struggles. Here are the key moments that shaped the country. 9/11s and the War on Terror. On September 11, 2001, 9/11s, terrorists attacked the U.S., destroying the Twin Towers in New York and damaging the Pentagon. Thousands of people died. In response, America launched the War on Terror, invading Afghanistan 2001 to defeat Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group behind the attacks, and later Iraq 2003, believing it had dangerous weapons which turned out to be false. These wars lasted many years, costing lives and money. The rise of Obama. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected as the first black president, bringing hope for change. He passed Obamacare healthcare reform, helped the economy recover after the 2008 financial crisis, and ordered the operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda. However, he faced strong opposition from Republicans, making some of his goals hard to achieve. Growing polarization. America became more divided politically. Democrats, liberals, and Republicans, conservatives argued fiercely over issues like immigration, guns, race, and climate change. Social media made these debates louder, sometimes spreading misinformation. The 2016 and 2020 elections were especially tense, with Donald Trump a polarizing Republican president and Joe Biden, his Democratic successor, representing very different visions for America. Technological revolution. Technology changed daily life. The internet and smartphones connected people worldwide. Companies like Google, Apple, and Facebook, now Meta, became huge, but concerns grew over privacy and misinformation. Social media shaped politics and culture, sometimes spreading fake news. Meanwhile, climate change became a major challenge, with wildfires, hurricanes, and debates over how to protect the environment. Looking ahead, modern America faces big questions. Can the country unite despite deep divisions? How will it handle new technologies and climate threats? The future depends on how Americans work together to solve these challenges. This period has been a mix of tragedy, progress, and change, shaping the America we know today.